The wind howled through dusty oak like a banshee, carrying with it the bitter cold of a November night in 1886. The small town, nestled between rolling hills and endless prairie, seemed to shrink under the weight of winter's early arrival. Gas lamps flickered weakly against the darkness, casting dancing shadows on the wooden sidewalks where frost was already beginning to form. Samuel Sam Garrett, known to most as the Lonely Cowman, rode his weathered stallion Thunder down Main Street. At 43, Sam's face bore the lines of a man who had seen too much and said too little. His dark eyes, shadowed beneath the brim of his worn hat, surveyed the quiet town with the wariness of someone who trusted few and expected less. "Hi, how are you? Sorry to interrupt your story, but what I'm going to ask you is really quick and it will really help the channel to grow and create new stories. Just click below the video image to subscribe. You'll be doing an act of kindness and encouragement to those who are just starting out. Thank you very much, and continue with your story now, and have a great day." Sam had been riding the circuit between towns for nearly 15 years, ever since the fever took his wife and young son back in Kansas. He carried their memory like a stone in his chest, heavy and constant. Tonight, he'd planned to stable Thunder, grab a hot meal, and find a bed for the night before moving on to the next town. That was always the plan. But as he approached Murphy's saloon, something made him pull the reins. Huddled against the saloon's weathered wall sat a small figure, a child, no more than 10 years old, wrapped in a threadbare shawl that did little to ward off the biting cold. The girl's dark hair hung in tangled strands around her pale face, and her lips had taken on a bluish tint that made Sam's heart clench with recognition. "Evening, mister," the child said softly as Sam dismounted. Her voice carried a maturity that seemed far beyond her years. "You wouldn't happen to have a spare coin for some food, would you?" Sam studied her for a moment. The townspeople walking past seemed to deliberately avoid looking in their direction, their faces set in expressions of practiced indifference. He'd seen this before, the way communities could turn blind eyes to suffering when it became inconvenient. "What's your name, child?" Sam asked, his voice gentler than most had heard it in years. "Lucy," she replied, pulling the shawl tighter around her small frame. "Lucy Morrison." The name seemed to cause a ripple of whispered conversation among a group of women passing by. Sam caught fragments. "That Morrison girl. Should have known. Trouble just like her." Sam's jaw tightened. Whatever history this child carried, it wasn't her fault. "When's the last time you ate, Lucy?" She looked down at her worn boots. "Yesterday morning, I think. Maybe the day before. Time gets fuzzy when you're cold." Without another word, Sam scooped her up in his arms. She weighed no more than a sack of grain, and he could feel her small body trembling against the cold. "Hey now," called out a voice from the saloon's entrance. "You sure you want to be messing with that one, stranger?" Sam turned to see a heavy-set man with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. Sheriff William Hawkins was a man who'd grown comfortable with his authority, his belly straining against his shirt, and his eyes holding the calculating look of someone always working an angle. "Just helping a child who's cold and hungry," Sam replied evenly. "That's Jeremiah Morrison's girl," Hawkins said, stepping closer. "Her daddy was a no-good drunk who owed half the town money before he disappeared last spring. Apple don't fall far from the tree, if you catch my meaning." "I catch that you're talking about a 10-year-old child who's freezing," Sam said, his voice carrying a warning edge. Hawkins held up his hands. "Just saying, stranger. That family's brought nothing but trouble to this town. You might want to think twice before getting involved." Sam looked down at Lucy, who had pressed her face against his shoulder. He could feel her trying to make herself smaller, as if she could disappear entirely. "I've thought about it," Sam said. "Come on, Lucy. Let's get you warm." He carried her into Murphy's saloon, where the warmth hit them like a wall. The conversations that had been flowing freely moments before died to whispers as every eye in the place turned toward them. Patrick Murphy, the Irish proprietor, looked up from behind the bar with a mixture of surprise and concern. "Sam Garrett, as I live and breathe, been a while since you've graced us with your presence." "Patrick," Sam nodded, settling Lucy into a chair near the fireplace. "The girl needs food and warmth." Murphy glanced around at his customers, reading the room. Of course. Mary," he called to his wife in the kitchen. "Bring out a bowl of that stew and some fresh bread." As Lucy warmed her hands by the fire, Sam noticed how she kept glancing toward the windows, as if watching for something. Her eyes held a wariness that reminded him painfully of his own son in those final days of the fever. "You got family, Lucy?" Sam asked quietly. She shook her head. "Just me now. Been just me since Daddy went away." "Where you been staying?" "Here and there. Old barn outside town mostly. Sometimes the church lets me sleep in the back pew when Reverend Clark ain't looking." Mary Murphy appeared with a steaming bowl of beef stew and a thick slice of bread. Lucy's eyes widened at the sight, and she looked up at Sam as if asking permission. "Go ahead, child. Eat your fill." As Lucy ate with the desperate hunger of someone who'd gone too long without, Sam became aware of the conversations resuming around them. But now the talk was about him, about his foolishness in helping that Morrison girl, about how outsiders never understood the way things worked in Dusty Oak. "You planning on staying the night?" Murphy asked quietly, refilling Sam's coffee. "Was planning on it. Might want to keep an eye on your belongings," Murphy said with a meaningful glance toward Lucy. "Just saying." Sam's eyes hardened. "She's a child, Patrick." "Aye, but she's a Morrison. And Morrisons have a way of bringing trouble wherever they go." As the evening wore on, Sam arranged for a room at the boarding house run by Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield, a stern but fair woman who agreed to let Lucy stay in the small storage room adjacent to Sam's quarters. The arrangement raised eyebrows throughout the town, but Sam paid them no mind. As they walked through the quiet streets toward the boarding house, Lucy finally spoke up. "Why are you helping me, mister?" Sam was quiet for a long moment. "Because everyone deserves kindness, especially children. And because—" He paused, remembering a small boy with fever-bright eyes. "Because someone should have been there when my boy needed help." Lucy looked up at him with those two old eyes. "I'm sorry about your boy." "Me too, Lucy. Me too." As they reached the boarding house, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows across the street, or the way that figure's hand moved to the gun at his hip before melting back into the darkness. The night was far from over, and morning would bring revelations that would shake Dusty Oak to its very foundations. The first light of dawn crept across Dusty Oak like a reluctant witness, painting the wooden buildings in shades of gold and amber. Sam Garrett had slept fitfully, his dreams haunted by memories of his son and the strange wariness he'd seen in young Lucy's eyes. He'd woken several times during the night, listening for sounds from the storage room where the child slept, but all had been quiet. It was the shouting that finally roused him completely. "Sheriff! Sheriff Hawkins!" The voice belonged to Deputy Marcus Cole, a young man whose enthusiasm often outpaced his judgment. "You need to come quick!" Sam pulled on his boots and stepped outside to find half the town gathering in the street. Mrs. Whitfield was already on her porch, her gray hair hastily pinned up and her face creased with concern. "What's all the commotion?" Sam asked. "Something's happened at the sheriff's office," she replied, wrapping her shawl tighter against the morning chill. "Deputy Cole's been running around like a chicken with its head cut off." Sheriff Hawkins emerged from his house across the street, still buttoning his vest. "What's got you all worked up, Cole?" "The safe, Sheriff. Someone broke into the safe." A murmur rippled through the growing crowd. Sam felt a cold knot forming in his stomach as he noticed the way several pairs of eyes had turned toward the boarding house. "What's missing?" Hawkins demanded. "The town's emergency fund," Cole replied breathlessly. "All of it, near $3,000. And—" he hesitated, glancing around at the crowd. "And what?" "The evidence from the Morrison case. All of it's gone." The murmur became a roar of angry voices. Sam heard fragments. "Knew it. That girl. Should have run her out of town." "Where's the Morrison girl?" Hawkins called out, his voice cutting through the noise. Sam stepped forward. "She's sleeping. Has been all night." "You sure about that, stranger?" The voice belonged to Thomas Brennan, the town's banker, a thin man with calculating eyes and a reputation for holding grudges. "You been watching her every second?" "She's a child who was exhausted and half-starved," Sam replied firmly. "She's been asleep since we got to the boarding house." "Convenient," Brennan sneered. "First night that Morrison girls had a roof over her head in months, and suddenly the sheriff's safe gets cracked." "That's enough," Mrs. Whitfield interjected. "I'll not have you speaking about a child that way on my property." But the damage was done. Sam could see the suspicion spreading through the crowd like wildfire. These people wanted someone to blame, and Lucy Morrison was an easy target. "I want to see the girl," Hawkins declared. "Now." Sam's hand instinctively moved toward his gun. "She's done nothing wrong." "Then she won't mind answering a few questions." The crowd pressed closer, and Sam realized how quickly this could turn ugly. He'd seen frontier justice before, and it rarely concerned itself with actual guilt or innocence. "I'll get her," he said finally. But when Sam knocked on the storage room door, there was no answer. When he pushed it open, the room was empty. The small window stood open, and the blanket Mrs. Whitfield had provided was neatly folded on the cot. Lucy Morrison was gone. "Well?" Hawkins called from outside. Sam's mind raced. The girl's disappearance would only confirm their suspicions, but something about this whole situation felt wrong. Why would a child who'd been grateful for a warm meal and a safe place to sleep suddenly risk everything to rob the sheriff's office? "She's not here," Sam called back. The crowd erupted. "I knew it. Little thief. Probably halfway to the next county by now." "Spread out," Hawkins ordered. "Check every building, every hiding spot. And you," he pointed at Sam, "you're coming with me. I had nothing to do with this." "Maybe not, but you were the last person to see her, and right now you're the only lead we've got." As the townspeople scattered to search for Lucy, Sam found himself walking alongside the sheriff toward the jail. His mind was working furiously, trying to piece together what had really happened. "Tell me about this Morrison case," Sam said. Hawkins glanced at him suspiciously. "Why?" "Because someone stole the evidence. That suggests this isn't just about the money." They reached the sheriff's office, where the heavy safe stood open, its contents scattered across the floor. Sam examined the lock mechanism, noting the precise way it had been opened. "This wasn't broken into," he observed. "Someone knew the combination." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that a 10-year-old girl didn't crack this safe. Someone with knowledge and experience did." Hawkins was quiet for a moment. "Jeremiah Morrison was good with locks," he admitted. "Before he took to drinking, he was the town's locksmith. And what happened to him? Disappeared last spring. Owed money all over town. Had been drinking heavy since his wife died. Most folks figured he just ran off. But you don't think so." Hawkins looked uncomfortable. "There were circumstances. Jeremiah had been asking questions about some old business deals, stirring up trouble with some of the town's more prominent citizens." Before Sam could press further, Deputy Cole burst through the door. "Sheriff, we found something!" He held up a small piece of fabric, torn from a child's dress. "Found it caught on the window frame at the back of the building." Sam examined the fabric. It was the same faded blue as the dress Lucy had been wearing, but something about it bothered him. The tier was too clean, too convenient. "This was planted," he said. "You calling me a liar?" Cole bristled. "I'm saying someone wants us to think Lucy did this." "Why would anyone frame a child?" Hawkins asked. "Because she knows something. Something about her father's disappearance, maybe. Something worth killing for." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sam could see the doubt creeping into Hawkins's eyes, the first crack in the certainty that had driven the mob's anger. "There's something else," Cole said reluctantly. "Old Pete at the livery stable says he saw someone near the jail around midnight. Tall figure, moving real careful-like. Did he recognize who it was? Too dark to tell, but he said it definitely wasn't a child." Sam felt a surge of hope. "Then we need to find Lucy before someone else does. Because if I'm right, she's not running from the law. She's running for her life." As if summoned by his words, a gunshot echoed from the hills outside town, sharp and final in the morning air. The hunt for Lucy Morrison had taken a deadly turn. The gunshot echoed through dusty oak like a death knell, sending birds scattering from the cottonwoods and freezing every person in the street. Sam Garrett felt his blood turn to ice as he realized the sound had come from the direction of the old Morrison homestead, abandoned since Jeremiah's disappearance. "Mount up!" Sheriff Hawkins shouted, but Sam was already running toward the livery stable where Thunder waited. The ride to the Morrison place took them through rolling hills, dotted with scrub brush and weathered fence posts. Sam pushed Thunder hard, his mind racing with possibilities, none of them good. Behind him, he could hear the thunder of hooves as Hawkins, Deputy Cole, and several townsmen followed. The Morrison homestead sat in a small valley, a modest two-room cabin with a sagging porch and broken windows. The barn behind it leaned at a dangerous angle, its roof partially collapsed. It was the kind of place that spoke of dreams deferred and hopes abandoned. As they approached, Sam saw her. Lucy Morrison stood in the doorway of the cabin, very much alive but trembling like a leaf in a storm. In her small hands, she clutched an old revolver that looked far too large for her to handle properly. "Stay back," she called out, her voice cracking with fear and determination. "I won't let you hurt me like you hurt my daddy." Sam dismounted slowly, his hands visible and empty. "Lucy, it's me, Sam. You remember me from last night?" "I remember," she said, but the gun didn't waver. "But I don't know who else you brought with you." Sheriff Hawkins started to speak, but Sam cut him off with a sharp gesture. This situation was balanced on a knife's edge, and one wrong word could send it spiraling into tragedy. "Lucy, honey, why don't you tell me what happened? Why did you leave the boarding house?" Tears were streaming down her face now. "I heard them coming, heard them talking outside my window about what they were going to do to me. So I ran. I came here because this is where Daddy used to hide things." "What kind of things?" "Papers. Important papers about the mine." Sam felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "What mine, Lucy?" "The silver mine up in Eagle Canyon. Daddy found it last year before he started drinking so much. He said it was gonna make us rich, gonna let us leave this place and start over somewhere new." Behind Sam, he heard Thomas Brennan's sharp intake of breath. The banker had ridden out with the posse, and his face had gone pale at Lucy's words. "That's enough!" Brennan shouted suddenly. "The girl's obviously delusional. There's no silver mine in Eagle Canyon. Everyone knows that land is worthless." But Lucy's eyes blazed with sudden fury. "You're a liar! Just like you were when you told Daddy nobody would believe him, when you said he was just a drunk making up stories." The pieces began falling into place in Sam's mind. "You knew about the mine," he said to Brennan. "That's why Jeremiah Morrison disappeared." "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about," Brennan snarled, but his hand was moving toward his gun. "I know enough," Sam replied, his own hand ready. "I know that a man finds silver on his land, and suddenly he's got enemies. I know that evidence goes missing the same night a child is framed for theft. And I know that you're sweating like a man with secrets." Sheriff Hawkins was looking between them with growing understanding. "Thomas, is this true? Did you know about Morrison's claim?" "The man was a drunk," Brennan exploded. "He had no right to that land. My family's been trying to buy that canyon for years, waiting for the right moment to develop it. Then this nobody stumbles onto the richest silver vein in the territory. So you killed him," Sam said quietly. "I defended what was rightfully mine." The admission hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Lucy's sob broke the silence, and Sam saw her small frame shaking with grief and vindication. "Where is he?" she whispered. "Where's my daddy?" Brennan's face twisted with something between guilt and defiance. "The old mine shaft on the north side of the canyon. He's been there since last spring." Deputy Cole had his gun drawn now, trained on Brennan. "You son of a—" "There's more," Lucy interrupted, her voice stronger now. "Show them, Mr. Brennan. Show them what you really stole from the safe." Brennan's face went ashen. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The deed," Lucy said. "Daddy filed a proper claim with the territorial office before he died. He hid a copy here and another copy in the sheriff's safe for safekeeping. That's what you really came for last night, wasn't it? The money was just, what do you call it? A diversion? Sam felt a surge of admiration for the girl's intelligence. You've been watching him, haven't you? Figuring out his plan. Lucy nodded. I've been living rough for months, but I've been watching, listening, learning who I could trust and who I couldn't. Last night, when you were kind to me, I thought, maybe I finally found someone who would help. But you ran. I heard them outside my window. Mr. Brennan and 2 other men. They were planning to take me in the night, make it look like I ran away after robbing the safe. But I got out first and came here to get Daddy's papers. She reached into her dress and pulled out a folded document, yellowed with age but still legible. This is the real deed to the Morrison claim. Daddy made sure it was all legal and proper. Sheriff Hawkins took the document with shaking hands. This changes everything. Lucy, you're not just innocent, you're rich. This claim is worth more than the entire town. Brennan made a desperate lunge for his gun, but Sam was faster. The shot echoed across the valley and Brennan crumpled to the ground, clutching his shoulder. It's over, Sam said firmly. The truth's out now. Lucy finally lowered the revolver, and Sam gently took it from her trembling hands. She collapsed against him, all the strength and determination that had carried her through the night finally giving way to the grief of a child who had lost everything and found it again. What happens now? She asked through her tears. Sam looked around at the assembled men, at Sheriff Hawkins, who was finally seeing the corruption that had festered in his town, at Deputy Cole, whose young face showed the shock of learning how deep betrayal could run, at the other townsmen who were beginning to understand how wrong they had been. Now, Sam said gently, we make sure your daddy gets a proper burial. We make sure his claim is honored, and we make sure you never have to be afraid again. As they prepared to ride back to town, Sam realized that for the first time in 15 years he wasn't thinking about moving on to the next place. Maybe, just maybe, he had found something worth staying for. But the story wasn't over yet. There were still secrets buried in Dusty Oak, and some of them were about to surface in ways no one expected. 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation at the Morrison homestead, and Dusty Oak was still reeling from the revelations that had shattered its quiet facade. The autumn sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Sam Garrett sat on the porch of the sheriff's office, watching the town slowly come to terms with its new reality. Thomas Brennan was in jail, awaiting trial for the murder of Jeremiah Morrison. His confession had led to the discovery of Morrison's body in the abandoned mine shaft, exactly where he'd said it would be. The banker's associates, including 2 prominent businessmen who had helped cover up the crime, were also behind bars, their reputations and fortunes in ruins. But perhaps the most dramatic change was in Lucy Morrison herself. The frightened, half-starved child who had huddled against Murphy's saloon that cold November night was gone, replaced by a young girl who walked with purpose and spoke with quiet confidence. The Morrison silver claim had indeed proven to be one of the richest strikes in the territory, and Lucy was now, on paper at least, one of the wealthiest people in 3 counties. "Penny for your thoughts," came a familiar voice. Sam looked up to see Sheriff Hawkins approaching, a cup of coffee in each hand. The lawman had aged visibly in the past weeks, the weight of his failure to protect Jeremiah Morrison and his daughter clearly wearing on him. "Just thinking about how much can change in such a short time," Sam replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "That it can," Hawkins agreed, settling into the chair beside him. "Got word from the territorial capital this morning. The Morrison claim has been officially validated. Lucy's going to need a guardian to help manage her affairs until she comes of age." Sam had been expecting this conversation. And, well, she's made it pretty clear who she wants that guardian to be. Through the window of Murphy's saloon, Sam could see Lucy sitting at a table with Mrs. Whitfield and Reverend Clark, poring over what looked like legal documents. At 10 years old, she was already showing a keen understanding of business that would have impressed men twice her age. "I'm not sure I'm the right man for that job, Bill," Sam said quietly. "I've been drifting for 15 years. Don't know if I remember how to stay in one place." "Maybe it's time you learned," Hawkins suggested. "That girl's been through hell, but she's got steel in her spine. Reminds me of someone else I know." Before Sam could respond, The sound of approaching horses drew their attention. A small group of riders was coming down Main Street, led by a woman in a dark traveling dress. As they drew closer, Sam recognized her as Margaret Sinclair, one of the territorial judges who had been overseeing the legal proceedings related to the Morrison case. "Gentlemen," Judge Sinclair said as she dismounted, "I trust you've been keeping our young heiress safe?" "Yes, ma'am," Hawkins replied. "She's inside with Mrs. Whitfield." "Good. I have some news that I think will interest all of you." They gathered in the sheriff's office, where Lucy joined them, her small hand confidently shaking the judges in greeting. Sam marveled again at the transformation in the child. "Miss Morrison," Judge Sinclair began, "I've been in contact with several mining companies who are very interested in purchasing your claim. The offers are substantial." She spread several documents across the desk. "The highest bid is from the Colorado Mining Consortium, $200,000 for the full claim." The room fell silent. It was more money than most people in Dusty Oak would see in several lifetimes. Lucy studied the papers carefully, then looked up at the judge. "What would happen to the people who work the mine if I sell?" "Well, the new owners would likely bring in their own crews. The local miners would probably be let go." Lucy frowned. "That doesn't seem fair. These people have been working hard, and they deserve to keep their jobs." Sam felt a surge of pride at her words. Despite everything she'd been through, the girl's first thought was for others. "There is another option," Judge Sinclair continued. "You could maintain ownership and hire a mining company to extract the silver for a percentage of the profits. It would mean less money up front, but potentially much more in the long run. And you could ensure that local workers keep their jobs." "I like that better," Lucy said immediately. "But I'd need help managing everything." All eyes turned to Sam. He felt the weight of their expectations, the hope in Lucy's eyes, and something else, the possibility of a future he'd never dared to imagine. "Lucy," he said carefully, "are you sure about this? About wanting me to stay and help you?" She nodded solemnly. "You're the first person who was kind to me without wanting something in return, and you believed in me when nobody else would. That's the kind of person I want on my side." Sam looked around the room at the faces watching him. Hawkins with his encouraging nod, Judge Sinclair with her professional approval, Mrs. Whitfield beaming from the doorway where she'd been listening. "Well then," he said finally, "I guess I'm staying in Dusty Oak." The smile that lit up Lucy's face was worth more than all the silver in the territory. Over the following days, plans began to take shape. Sam would serve as Lucy's legal guardian and help manage her business interests. The Morrison Mining Company, as Lucy had decided to name it, would employ local workers and contribute a percentage of its profits to improving the town's schools and infrastructure. Mrs. Whitfield had offered to let Lucy stay at the boarding house permanently, in a proper room this time, and Reverend Clark had volunteered to continue her education. The girl who had once begged for scraps outside a saloon was now surrounded by people who cared about her welfare. But perhaps the most significant change was in Sam himself. For the first time since losing his family, he felt like he had a purpose beyond simply surviving each day. Lucy needed him, yes, but he was beginning to realize that he needed her too, needed the hope and determination she represented, the chance to build something meaningful instead of just drifting from place to place. On a crisp December morning, exactly 1 month after that fateful night when he'd first found Lucy shivering in the cold, Sam stood outside the newly renovated Morrison house. Lucy had insisted on rebuilding her family home rather than moving somewhere grander, and Sam had helped her plan every detail. "It looks just like I remember it," Lucy said, coming to stand beside him. "But better, stronger, like you," Sam observed. She looked up at him with those wise eyes that had seen too much for someone so young. "Like both of us, I think." As they walked toward the house together, Sam realized that sometimes the most important journeys weren't about the miles you traveled, but about the courage to stop running and start building something worth staying for. The lonely cowman had found his home at last, and Dusty Oak would never be the same. In the distance, the silver mine gleamed in the morning sun, a symbol of new beginnings and the truth that sometimes the greatest treasures are found not in the ground, but in the connections we make with those who need us most. The story of Sam Garrett and Lucy Morrison had become legend in Dusty Oak, a reminder that even in the hardest times, kindness could change everything, and that family wasn't always about blood, but about the people who chose to stand by you when the world seemed darkest. And in the end, that was the greatest treasure of all. Hello, how are you? Did you enjoy the story? Like, share, comment on which city you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel to help us continue adding new, amazing videos. Thank you very much, and come back often.